Let's speak now to Siphelele Ngobese, researcher at Inclusive Cities at the South African Cities Network. Siphelele, good afternoon to you. There's anecdotal claims that this city is safer than that city, or this area is safer than that area. Do we find, when we look through the numbers, that we see that there is evidence to show that that is the case? Some cities, almost the design of them makes them safer or more dangerous than others.
Certainly, Stephen. So, the answer is a bit tricky. In some cases, the perceptions and the anecdotal evidence tend to match. And in other cases, perceptions don't quite match the true picture of crime and violence in any given city. If I may give you an example, so previously, and I think perhaps even currently, there are perceptions that Johannesburg is quite a dangerous city compared to others in South Africa. But when you actually look at objective evidence, you find just, for example, on the indicator or on the measure of murder, you find that Johannesburg is one of the cities that's lower on the rung in terms of murders per 100,000, whereas some cities that tend to be perceived to be safer are actually just talking on the score of murder, they're having quite high numbers compared to the national average. So that's just one example of how sometimes perceptions don't match objective evidence.
Some cities are very far apart. I mean, I don't need to tell anyone how far apart Musina or Mahikeng and Cape Town are. But some cities are very close together. So Joburg and Tshwane are very close together. They're separated by just a few kilometers. Do we find there's a big difference in the number and the type of crimes reported in those cities? Or do you find that actually certain areas within those cities are very similar to certain other areas in the cities just down the highway?
Okay, so I'll respond to your latter question first. We do find that crime is concentrated in relatively few places in any city, and so the numbers and what we see when we read through some of the types of crimes and what's happening and the reported crimes, we do find that the reporting tends to give the impression that whole city is challenged with crime, while we find that crime is concentrated in very specific cities and that the responses should target the drivers in those specific cities. With regards to your first question, I would say that yes, so Johannesburg, for example, and Pretoria are quite close together geographically, but the drivers and dynamics are almost completely different. You have a very different picture of crime in Pretoria, and perhaps it might be due to what the city is and what it represents. It is the capital city. It is a city that hosts a lot of our national key points. It is a city that hosts a lot of our foreign missions hosted in South Africa. And so perhaps that might be one of the key factors that lead to Pretoria having a very different picture of crime. But of course, when you look at, and we tend to advance in our work, this understanding that disadvantaged areas, previously or presently disadvantaged areas, tend to be under-policed, tend to have significantly higher challenges and are more burdened with a lot of the crime problems and problems of violence that we see manifest in our country as a whole. And so there is a need to focus on those. And so when I might be talking about the situation of crime and violence and talking about where we host foreign missions, where national key points are, that is not to take away from that. As I said before, crime is concentrated in relatively few places in a city. There might be a need to focus on those areas that are disadvantaged economically, spatially, and you did mention that space, the configuration of space, can enable or disable crime, and so how those spaces are configured might need special attention and special interventions.
I mean, there are lots of different things here. We know that the causes of crime are deep-rooted. Almost every country in the world has crime. There are different levels of violent crime. There's a thing called a crime floor. So almost no matter what you do in London, you're probably going to have 200 people being killed every year in London because of the size of the population and various other factors. But if we can make changes in certain areas, that will have an impact. I mean, is it possible to know what those changes might be? And I realize that if there was an easy answer to this, every city in the world would do it, and clearly there isn't an easy answer to this.
No, there is not. You're quite right in that sense. But, just related to what I was saying about crime hotspots and crime being concentrated in different parts of a city, when you profile, when you do the work in terms of the research side of things, the work of understanding where crime problems are emanating, and you can do that with relative ease when you look at police station precinct reports upon which our national crime stats are based, then you can get a sense of where the most challenged places are in any given city. That enables you, from a fiscal perspective, to be able to target your interventions. Also, just from crime reduction success rate point of view, it then enables you to study what the dynamics are in that particular place, what the drivers are. So just to give you an example, we did a little bit of a flash study of crime hotspots in different cities, and we found that the drivers were completely different in each city and in each particular location in that city. So, for example, when you're looking at KwaMashu in Durban or eThekwini municipality compared to Philippi East in Cape Town, compared to Hillbrow in Johannesburg, and those are just some of the areas that we found were the crime hotspots in those respective cities, we found that the drivers were quite different. So in one, it had to do with the challenge of gangsterism, access to illicit firearms. In others, it was substance use that was a key driver. In others, it was just what we call migration factors and a high density location, and so the spatial configuration also became one of the things that was enabling of crime, whereas in another just basic things that we might not think have an impact on crime reduction, such as grass cutting, such as lighting, so bushy areas, communities pointing out that in this particular spot in our neighborhood, we tend to have problems due to, lack of grass cutting. We are scared to send children to shop. So different drivers in different places. Hence, we like to emphasize the point that it's quite important to understand the specificities of each place so that you are able to tailor your responses, and also that helps in terms of savings because cities are quite overstretched and budgets are low.
Siphelele, I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but there's so much to talk about. Thank you very much indeed. Siphelele Ngobese is a researcher for inclusive cities at the South African Cities Network.